They said she wasn't alive, just a reaction waiting to happen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile white glow across corridor C-17, where even the air felt filtered and distant, like it didn't quite belong to the people breathing it. Daniel Hayes pushed his janitor cart forward, the small wheels rattling softly over the grated floor, his worn boots echoing just enough to remind him he was still there, still real, even if no one ever looked at him long enough to notice. The digital panel on the wall flickered as he passed. Biohazard zone. Authorized personnel only. Its red lettering pulsing like a slow heartbeat, mechanical and indifferent. He kept his head down, like always, like everyone expected, just another shadow in a facility built on secrets. The smell hit him first, faint but unmistakable, like overheated circuits and something colder underneath, something organic but wrong, and he slowed without meaning to, his hand tightening on the handle of his cart. Ahead, the hallway widened into a reinforced observation chamber, thick glass stretching from floor to ceiling, its surface laced with hairline cracks that had been sealed but not forgotten. A pair of researchers stood off to the side, voices low, tense, their eyes fixed on the containment cell beyond. Daniel wasn't supposed to look, but he did anyway, just a glance at first, the kind people take when they think it doesn't matter. Inside the chamber, she stood alone, no chains that he could see, no restraints, just space, too much space, like the room itself was trying to keep its distance. Her skin caught the light in strange ways, not reflective, not exactly, but alive with a faint warmth, like the last color of a sunset before night takes over. Her posture was still, too still, like she had learned the cost of movement, and her eyes, those were what held him, focused not on the walls, not on the cameras, but somewhere lower, like she was waiting for something that never came. "Don't linger," one of the researchers muttered as Daniel's cart squeaked to a stop, the man's badge catching the light as he shifted. It reacts to proximity. But Daniel didn't move right away, not because he was brave, not because he thought he understood anything about what stood behind that glass, but because for a second, just one, he noticed something no one else seemed to care about. She wasn't pacing, wasn't pressing against the barrier, wasn't doing anything that matched the word they kept using. Monster. The word hung in the air like a label someone had decided was easier than asking questions. Daniel swallowed, the dry taste of recycled air settling in his throat, and he nodded like he understood, like he'd walk away and forget what he saw, like everyone else did. But as he turned the cart, the wheels catching slightly on the edge of the floor seam, he risked one more look, just long enough to meet her gaze. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like recognition, and for reasons he couldn't explain, reasons that didn't fit into any protocol or training manual. Daniel Hayes slowed down instead of speeding up, his footsteps quieter now, as if the silence between them mattered, more than anything the station could measure. The wheels of Daniel Hayes's cart rolled a few more feet before he stopped again, the faint vibration traveling up through the metal handle into his palms, as if the station itself was reminding him to keep moving, to stay within the quiet rhythm of assigned tasks and unasked questions. But something in that room behind the glass had already unsettled that rhythm, already shifted it just enough that continuing forward felt like ignoring something important. The corridor stretched ahead in clean, repeating panels of white and steel, temperature holding steady at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, air pressure normal, every system in perfect balance except for the one thing no sensor could measure. He glanced over his shoulder, slow this time, not pretending it was accidental, and the researchers were gone, their conversation cut short or relocated to somewhere safer, somewhere more controlled, leaving the observation chamber silent except for the low hum of containment fields. Daniel hesitated, then guided his cart back, each step softer than the last until he stood in front of the glass again, closer now, close enough to see the faint patterns beneath her skin, like light moving underwater, subtle and shifting, not threatening, just different. She had not moved far, only a few inches at most, but now her eyes were fixed directly on him, steady, unblinking, and for a moment he wondered if the warning had been right, if proximity really did change something, if he had just crossed an invisible line. He set the cart brake with a quiet click and reached for the cleaning cloth, more out of habit than necessity, wiping a section of the Already spotless glass just to give his hands something to do. Something normal. The reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw. A man who spent more time fixing other people's messes than understanding them. And behind that reflection, her. You are not supposed to be here long. A voice crackled through the wall speaker, automated and flat. A reminder triggered by his presence lingering beyond standard parameters. But Daniel did not answer, because there was nothing to say that would fit into the system's expectations. Instead, he looked at her again, really looked this time, noticing the way her shoulders were slightly drawn in, not in aggression, but in something closer to restraint, as if she was holding herself back from reacting to something she did not fully trust. The word they used echoed in his mind again, monster, and it felt smaller now, thinner, like it did not quite reach what he was seeing. Slowly, without making a show of it, Daniel pulled a simple, folding stool from the lower shelf of his cart, the kind maintenance staff used during long repairs, and set it down beside the glass. The legs clicked into place with a soft metallic snap that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. He paused, half expecting alarms, half expecting her to change, to prove everyone right. But nothing happened except the steady hum of the station and the quiet presence on the other side. So he sat, not close enough to touch the barrier, not close enough to crowd her space, just there, a few feet away, shoulders relaxed, hands resting loosely on his knees, like he was waiting for a bus that would never come. The silence stretched, but it did not feel empty. Her head tilted slightly, a small movement, almost cautious, and the light beneath her skin shifted again, slower now, softer. Daniel exhaled, a breath he did not realize he had been holding. And for the first time since stepping into corridor C-17, the air felt less filtered, less distant. He did not know what she was, did not know what had happened in that room before he arrived, but sitting there, with nothing between them except glass and expectation, he understood one thing with quiet certainty. Whatever she was reacting to, it was not him, and for now, that was enough. Time passed differently when he sat there, not marked by announcements or shift rotations, but by the slow rhythm of breath and the quiet exchange of presence that no one had trained him to recognize. Daniel Hayes shifted slightly on the folding stool, the metal legs creaking under his weight as he adjusted his posture, careful not to move too suddenly, not because he was afraid, but because something about the stillness between them felt fragile, like a surface that could ripple if disturbed. The overhead lights dimmed by a fraction as the station cycled into its evening power profile, casting softer shadows across the containment chamber, and for the first time he noticed that the light beneath her skin responded to it, fading and brightening in subtle waves that mirrored the change, as if she was not just standing in the environment but feeling it. He rested his elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped, and let his gaze drift for a moment to the control panel embedded in the wall beside the glass, its display scrolling lines of data he was not meant to understand. Biometric readings, neural fluctuations, stress indicators, all reduced to numbers and graphs that tried to define something far more complicated. One line caught his eye, a simple label followed by a steady decline, agitation index, trending downward since he had arrived. Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite, because he did not know what to do with that information, did not know how sitting still could change anything in a place built on control and measurement. On the other side of the glass, she moved again, just a small shift of weight from one foot to the other. But it was the first movement that felt intentional rather than restrained, and her gaze did not leave him. There was something searching in it now, not confusion, not hostility, but a kind of cautious curiosity that made his chest tighten in a way he did not expect. You are not like the others. The words came softly, not through the speaker, not through any system he could see, but directly into the space between them, clear and steady, carrying a tone that was neither male nor female, neither near nor far. And for a second Daniel wondered if he had imagined it, if the long hours and recycled air had finally caught up to him. He straightened slightly, eyes narrowing as he looked at her, really looked, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some kind of test, but all he saw was the same steady presence, the same quiet focus. "I am just the janitor," he said after a moment, his voice low, almost apologetic, because it felt strange to speak aloud in a place where silence had become the norm. and the words sounded smaller than he meant them to. Her head tilted again, that same subtle angle, as if she was processing not just the sound but the meaning behind it, and the light beneath her skin shifted once more, warmer this time, like a faint glow at the edge of dusk. "You stay?" The voice returned, softer now, less certain, as if the concept itself was unfamiliar, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest, something simple and steady that did not need explanation. He glanced briefly toward the corridor, half expecting someone to appear, to interrupt, to remind him that this was not his place. But the hallway remained empty, the station continuing its endless cycle, without noticing the quiet anomaly forming in one of its sealed rooms. So he nodded, not because she had asked, not because he had decided anything in particular, but because the answer had already been there before the question. "Yeah," he said quietly, leaning back on the stool, letting his shoulders relax as he faced her without hesitation. "I stay." The station clock ticked over to 2,100 hours without ceremony, just another silent transition marked by a slight dimming of the overhead panels and the distant hum of systems recalibrating for the night cycle. But inside Observation Chamber C-17, something had already shifted beyond routine. Daniel Hayes rubbed his palms together slowly, feeling the faint grit of cleaning solvent still clinging to his skin, grounding himself in something familiar as he sat across from her, the glass between them no longer feeling like a barrier so much as a line drawn out of habit. The air felt warmer here now, though the temperature display still read 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and he realized it was not the environment changing but his awareness of it, the way tension had eased just enough to let him breathe without thinking about it. On the wall, the monitoring panel flickered again, lines of data updating in quiet intervals, heart rate steady, neural activity stabilizing. And beneath it all, a small indicator blinking in soft amber, unfamiliar to him but persistent, like a system trying to decide whether what it was seeing made sense. He followed her gaze as it drifted briefly to the glass, to the faint reflection of herself layered over his image, and for a moment it looked like they were sitting in the same space, separated only by a difference no instrument could quantify. "Why do they fear what is still?" Her voice returned, not loud, not intrusive, just present, like a thought that had always been there waiting to be heard. And Daniel exhaled slowly, the question settling heavier than he expected. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs, eyes narrowing slightly as he considered how to answer something that did not have a simple explanation. "Because stillness looks like waiting," he said after a moment, choosing each word carefully. "And people get nervous when they do not know what comes next." Her head tilted again, the motion smoother now, less guarded, and the light beneath her skin pulsed once. A soft wave that seemed almost thoughtful. "I was waiting," she said, and there was no accusation in it, no edge, just a statement that carried more weight than it should have. Daniel nodded, his gaze dropping briefly to the floor before returning to her, because that made sense in a way the reports never would. The station liked to label things, categorize them, reduce them to variables that could be controlled, but waiting was not something you could measure, not really. He reached down to the side of his cart and pulled out a small insulated bottle, the kind maintenance staff carried during long shifts, twisting the cap open with a quiet click before taking a sip, the lukewarm water, grounding him again in the simple reality of his own body. After a second, he set the bottle down near the glass, not pushing it forward, not making a gesture out of it, just leaving it there, an option rather than an offering. She noticed, of course she did, her gaze flicking to it, and then back to him, and for a brief moment the light beneath her skin brightened, not dramatically, just enough to be seen if you were paying attention. "You bring nothing to contain me," she observed, and there was something almost curious in the phrasing, as if the absence of control was more confusing than its presence. Daniel let out a small breath, something between a shrug and a quiet laugh, and leaned back slightly on the stool, letting the metal frame creak under his weight. "I am not here to contain you," he replied, the words simple, unpolished, but steady in a way that did not need reinforcement. The silence that followed was different from before, not empty, not cautious, but shared, like two people sitting on opposite sides of a long road, aware of each other without needing to close the distance. Outside the chamber, A distant door hissed open and shut, footsteps echoing faintly before fading again. The station continuing its endless motion, unaware that in one small room, something it could not measure had already begun to change. Daniel shifted his weight once more, settling in as if he had nowhere else to be. And for the first time since stepping into that corridor, the word they used felt completely out of place. Not because it was wrong in the way definitions are wrong, but because it no longer fit what he was seeing. Across the glass, she remained still, but it was no longer the kind of stillness that made people uneasy. It was the kind that chose to stay. The soft amber indicator on the wall panel shifted to a steady glow, no longer blinking as if uncertain, and Daniel Hayes noticed it only because everything else in the room had grown so quiet that even the smallest change felt amplified. He leaned slightly to the side, squinting at the display, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar symbol, but it offered no explanation, just a presence. A silent acknowledgment that something had crossed a threshold no one had planned for. Across the glass. She followed his gaze for a moment, then returned her attention to him, her posture easing in a way that was almost imperceptible unless you had been watching her as long as he had. The light beneath her skin no longer flickered in uneven pulses, but moved in slow, deliberate patterns, like a steady current beneath the surface of a calm lake. "They measure what they do not trust," she said, her voice threading through the air with the same quiet clarity, and Daniel let out a small breath through his nose, the corner of his mouth lifting just slightly. "That sounds about right," he replied, his tone carrying a hint of dry humor, though his eyes remained thoughtful, because there was truth in that statement that reached far beyond this room. He shifted forward again, resting his elbows on his knees, and tapped lightly on the glass with one knuckle, not to get her attention but to test the boundary, to remind himself it was still there. The sound was dull, contained, absorbed by layers of reinforced material designed to separate worlds. "What do they think you are?" he asked after a moment, the question simple but carrying more weight than he intended. She did not answer immediately, and for a second he wondered if the question itself was flawed, if it assumed something that did not apply to her. Then her gaze lowered slightly, not in avoidance, but in consideration, as if she was searching for a word that fit a concept she did not fully accept. "They think I reflect," she said. Finally, and the word lingered in the air, incomplete on its own. Daniel frowned faintly, leaning back as he processed it, his fingers drumming once against his knee before going still. "Reflect what?" he asked, quieter now, because the answer felt like it mattered more than anything else that had been said. Her eyes lifted again, meeting his with a steadiness that held no fear, no hesitation, just a kind of clarity that made his chest tighten. "Them," she said, and the simplicity of it carried a weight that settled into the room like gravity. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment to the reflection. In the glass, his own face faintly visible beside hers, distorted slightly by the angle and the light. He thought about the warnings, the reports, the way people avoided this corridor unless they had no choice. And for the first time, the pieces began to align in a way that felt less like mystery and more like something uncomfortably familiar. "So if they are afraid," he said slowly, his voice steady but softer now, "you show fear back to them." The light beneath her skin dimmed slightly, not fading but settling, like a response that did not need to be emphasized. "I show what is given," she replied, and there was no judgment in it, no accusation, just a statement of function that carried more meaning than any label they had assigned her. Daniel nodded once, the motion small but deliberate, because that explained more than any file he had not been allowed to read. He reached for the insulated bottle again, taking another sip before setting it back in the same spot, the simple routine grounding him as the implications settled. "Then they never really saw you," he said, almost to himself, but she heard it anyway, her gaze softening in a way that was difficult to define, the light beneath her skin warming just a fraction. Outside the chamber, footsteps approached again, slower this time, deliberate, and Daniel did not turn to look, not yet, because something told him that whatever was coming would not change what had already been set in motion. Inside the room, the silence held, not empty, not tense, but full of something the station could not measure, something that did not need a label to exist. And for the first time, Daniel understood that sitting here was not just a choice. It was a variable no one had accounted for. The footsteps outside the chamber did not pass this time. They slowed, then stopped just beyond the threshold of the observation area, and Daniel Hayes felt it before he saw it. That subtle shift in the air when attention turns into scrutiny. When something quiet is about to be interrupted by something official. He did not turn immediately, his eyes still on her, because whatever had been building between them felt more important than the interruption. But he heard the soft hiss of the access door and the measured cadence of boots stepping onto the grated floor, precise and controlled, the kind of movement that belonged to people who believed in systems. Maintenance staff are not authorized to remain in this sector beyond assigned intervals. The voice was calm, not raised, but firm in a way that carried expectation, and Daniel finally turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the presence without fully breaking the connection. A man in a clean gray uniform stood a few feet behind him, tablet in hand, eyes flicking between Daniel and the containment cell, calculating, assessing, trying to fit what he was seeing into a report that would make sense later. Daniel nodded once, slow, as if the information had just reached him, though they both knew he had heard it before. "I am finishing up," he replied, his voice even, unhurried, the kind of answer that did not invite further conversation. The man's gaze narrowed slightly, not in anger but in confusion, because there was no visible task being completed, no tool in use, just a janitor sitting in a place he was not meant to linger. Behind the glass, she remained still, but the light beneath her skin shifted, a faint ripple that Daniel noticed immediately, the first sign of tension returning since he had arrived. He exhaled quietly, turning back toward her fully now, deliberately placing himself between her and the presence behind him, not in defiance, not in challenge, just in a simple, grounded way that made his position clear without words. The man behind him took another step forward, the soft tap of his boots echoing once before settling into silence. Again, and the tablet in his hand chimed softly, data updating in response to the change in proximity. Subject response is increasing. The man said, more to the device than to Daniel, his tone clinical, detached, as if the moment unfolding in front of him was nothing more than a variable to be recorded. Daniel glanced briefly at the wall panel, the amber indicator flickering again, uncertain now, reacting to the shift in atmosphere. And he felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, not exactly, but awareness. "You are changing the environment," the man continued, his voice steady, but there was a subtle edge to it now, a hint of urgency beneath the control. "Step away and allow the system to recalibrate." Daniel did not move. He remained seated, shoulders relaxed, hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze returning to her as if the instruction had not been given, as if the system behind him did not define what was happening in front of him. "She is not the one changing it," he said quietly, the words simple, but carrying a weight that made the man pause for half a second longer than he intended. Behind the glass, her head lifted slightly, her eyes fixed on Daniel again, and the light beneath her skin steadied, the ripples smoothing into a calm, even glow. The tablet chimed once more, a different tone this time, and the man's eyes flicked down to read it, his expression shifting, not dramatically, but enough to show that something in the data did not match his expectations. Daniel did not need to see the screen to understand what it said. He could feel it in the room, in the way the air had settled again, in the absence of that earlier tension. "This is not consistent with prior observations," the man murmured, almost to himself, and Daniel allowed himself a small breath, not a victory, not even relief, just recognition. Across the glass, she remained as she was, still but present, no longer reacting to fear, no longer reflecting uncertainty, just existing in a way the system could not quite define. And in that quiet space, between the measured voice behind him and the steady gaze in front of him, Daniel realized that whatever they thought they were studying had already begun to change the moment someone chose not to be afraid. The man behind Daniel Hayes did not speak immediately this time, and that silence carried more weight than his earlier instructions, as if the system he trusted was now hesitating alongside him. The tablet in his hand emitted a low, continuous tone, not an alarm, not quite, but something that suggested the data stream had entered unfamiliar territory. And Daniel could almost picture the graphs flattening where they were expected to spike, the predictions failing quietly in the background. Step away, the man repeated, but the certainty was thinner now, stretched over something he did not fully understand. And Daniel remained where he was, not out of defiance, not out of stubbornness, but because leaving felt like breaking something that had finally settled into place. Across the glass, her gaze shifted past him for the first time since the man had entered, not locking onto the new presence but acknowledging it. And the light beneath her skin responded in a way Daniel had not seen before, not rising, not dimming, but splitting, two faint currents moving in opposite directions, one steady and warm toward him, the other flickering and uncertain toward the figure behind. You carry division. Her voice moved through the space again, quieter than before, almost strained, and Daniel felt the words land in the room like a dropped tool, simple but impossible to ignore. The man frowned, glancing up sharply, his eyes scanning for a speaker, for any device that could explain the communication, but there was none, only the glass and the space beyond it. There is no authorized interface for verbal exchange, he said, more firmly now, clinging to procedure, to the rules that defined what was possible, and Daniel shook his head slightly, not turning, not breaking eye contact with her. She does not need one, he replied, his voice calm, grounded in the same quiet certainty that had kept him seated this long. The man took another step forward, and this time the reaction was immediate, the light beneath her skin flickering more sharply on one side, the air in the chamber shifting just enough to be felt, not seen, like pressure building in a sealed space. Daniel lifted one hand slowly, not toward her, not toward the glass, but slightly outward, a small, open gesture that carried no threat, no command, just presence. It is okay, he said, not loudly, not urgently, but with a steadiness that cut through the tension, and the effect was immediate, the flicker smoothing out, the divided currents settling back into a single, even flow. The tablet chimed again, a sharper tone this time, and the man's eyes widened just slightly as he read the updated metrics, his posture shifting from authority to something closer to uncertainty. This is not possible, he murmured, the words slipping out before he could filter them, and Daniel almost smiled, not because anything was resolved, but because for the first time, someone else was seeing the same thing he was. Across the glass, she remained still, but there was something different in the way she held that stillness now, not restrained, not waiting, but choosing, and her gaze returned fully to Daniel, steady and clear. You do not divide, she said, and there was a softness in the statement that had not been there before, something that felt less like observation and more like understanding. Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering just a fraction as the tension in the room eased again, and he nodded once, not because he had an answer, but because he recognized what she meant. Behind him, the man lowered the tablet slightly, the glow of its screen reflecting faintly in his eyes as the data continued to contradict everything he thought he knew. The station systems hummed on, unchanged, indifferent, but in that small room, something fundamental had shifted, not in the subject they had been studying, but in the assumptions they had built around her. And as Daniel sat there, between the certainty of procedure and the quiet truth unfolding in front of him, he realized that whatever happened next would not be decided by the system, but by who was willing to stay. The hum of the station deepened as the night cycle settled fully into place, a low, steady vibration that seemed to press gently against the walls, as if the structure itself was listening. And Daniel Hayes remained seated, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his breath, aware now that the moment had stretched beyond anything routine, beyond anything that could be quietly dismissed or logged and forgotten. Behind him, the man in gray lowered his tablet completely, the glow of its screen dimming as if even the device had run out of ways to interpret what it was seeing. And for a few seconds, no one spoke, the silence no longer fragile, but deliberate, as if it had chosen to stay. Across the glass, she stood with the same quiet presence, but there was a difference now, something subtle in the way her shoulders aligned, in the way the light beneath her skin moved with a calm that no longer reacted to the room but seemed to define it. "You changed the pattern," she said, her voice softer than before, not directed only at Daniel this time, but at the space itself, at the shift that had taken place. And Daniel felt the words settle. Somewhere deeper than thought, somewhere that did not need explanation. He leaned forward slightly, resting his hands together, fingers interlaced, his gaze steady on hers, not searching, not questioning, just present. "Or maybe it was always there," he replied, the words simple, almost uncertain, but honest in a way that did not try to control the meaning. Behind him, the man took a slow breath, the kind that came when someone realized they were standing at the edge of something they could not measure. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, not losing authority, but loosening its grip on certainty. "If this response is stable," he said, choosing his words carefully, "then the containment protocol may need to be reassessed." And even as he said it, it sounded less like a directive and more like a realization forming in real time. Daniel did not turn, but he nodded slightly, acknowledging the shift without claiming it, because this was not his to define, not his to control. The wall panel flickered once more, and this time the amber indicator transitioned to a soft green, steady and quiet, no longer questioning, no longer warning, just present, like a system finally recognizing something it had not been designed to see. Daniel noticed it in his peripheral vision and allowed himself a small exhale, not relief exactly, but something close to it, something that felt like the absence of tension rather than the presence of safety. Across the glass, she stepped closer, just a single step, measured and unhurried, and stopped a few inches from the barrier, her reflection now overlapping his completely, the two images blending into something that did not look divided at all. Daniel did not move back, did not lean away. He simply remained where he was, his posture open, his presence unchanged, and for a moment, the distance between them felt smaller than the thickness of the reinforced glass. "When you stay," she said quietly, her gaze steady, "there is no echo," and the meaning settled into the room with a clarity that no data stream could replicate. Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders easing as he absorbed the weight of that statement. Because it was not just about her, not just about this room. It was about something far more human, something that had nothing to do with systems or protocols. Behind him, the man took another step, but this time it was slower, less intrusive, as if he was approaching not to control but to understand, and the tablet remained lowered at his side, forgotten for the moment. The station continued its quiet operations, lights dimming, systems cycling, unaware that in one sealed chamber, a single choice had rewritten the conditions of an entire experiment. And as Daniel sat there, unmoving, he realized that whatever came next, whatever decisions would be made beyond this room, one truth had already been established, not by force, not by design, but by something far simpler. She had not changed because of what they did to her. She had changed because someone chose not to treat her like something that needed to be feared. The green indicator on the wall remained steady, a quiet confirmation that no alarms would sound, no immediate corrections would be forced, and for the first time since Daniel Hayes had entered Corridor C-17, the system had nothing left to say. The hum of the station softened into the background, no longer pressing against the moment but allowing it to exist on its own, and Daniel stayed where he was, seated on the small folding stool, his hands resting loosely, his posture unchanged, as if movement itself would be unnecessary now. Across the glass, she stood only a few inches away, close enough that the faint patterns beneath her skin were no longer abstract, no longer distant, but clear, flowing and slow, even currents that matched the calm of the room, and her reflection aligned perfectly with his, not overlapping, not distorting, just there, two forms sharing the same space in a way the barrier could not fully separate. Behind him, the man in gray lowered his gaze from the tablet entirely, the device slipping to his side as if it had become irrelevant, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the earlier certainty, only a quiet recognition. "We built the wrong question," he said, almost to himself, and Daniel did not turn, because he already understood what that meant. The station had been asking what she was, how she reacted, how to contain her, but it had never asked what she needed to be seen as something other than a response. Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath steady, unforced, and he leaned forward just slightly, not closing the distance, not testing the glass, but acknowledging her presence with the same quiet consistency that had guided every moment since he sat down. "What happens now?" he asked, not to the man behind him, not to the system, but to her. She did not answer right away, and the silence that followed was not uncertainty, not hesitation, but consideration, as if the question itself was new, as if the future had never been something she was allowed to define. The light beneath her skin shifted once, a gentle wave that moved from her shoulders down through her form, settling into a steady glow that felt less like reaction and more like choice. "Now," she said softly, her voice carrying a clarity that filled the space without force. "You leave, and they decide what I am again." The words were not bitter, not resigned, just true, and Daniel felt them settle into his chest with a weight that did not demand action but invited it. He glanced briefly at the glass, at the invisible line that separated them, and then back at her, his expression unchanged but his understanding deeper than before. "That does not mean they are right," he said, the words quiet, almost simple, but grounded in something that did not shift with authority or protocol. Behind him, the man shifted his stance, the faint sound of his boots echoing once before fading, and when he spoke again, it was not as an order, not as a correction, but as a decision forming. "Observation protocols will be revised," he said, more firmly now, but without the earlier rigidity. "This interaction will be documented as baseline, not anomaly." Daniel allowed himself a small nod, not an acknowledgment of the system, but of the shift it represented, because it was not about changing her, it was about changing how they saw her, across the glass. She remained still, her gaze steady on his, and for a moment, the room felt larger than it was, as if the walls had stepped back to give space to something that did not fit inside containment. "You stayed," she said, and this time the words carried something new, not just observation, not just understanding, but meaning, something that lingered beyond the moment itself. Daniel stood slowly, the stool creaking softly as he rose, and for a second, the distance between them felt real again, measured, defined, but it no longer carried the same weight. He picked up the stool, folded it with a quiet click, and placed it back onto the cart, his movements unhurried, deliberate, as if each action mattered. He did not reach for the glass, did not test it, did not try to bridge the space in any way the system would recognize. He simply looked at her, steady and present. "Yeah," he said quietly, the words simple, but complete in a way that needed no explanation. Then he turned, guiding the cart forward, the wheels rolling softly across the floor as he moved toward the corridor, toward the rest of the station, toward everything that would continue as if nothing had changed. Behind him, the room remained silent, the green indicator steady, the data stable, but something had shifted that no report could fully capture. Because in a place built to measure reactions, one human had offered something else entirely, and for the first time, she had not reflected fear or confusion or control, she had reflected presence.